So elephant not in the room yet, coming sometime this fall, is Dragon Age the Veilguard. I always want to say the previous name, but it's just they renamed it for some reason. Anyway, Dragon Age the Veilguard. This is, of course, the latest game coming from Bioware. Bioware has a long storied history in the gaming industry, and they were at one time industry darlings. I mean, they could do really no wrong. But that started to change in 2017 when they had a bit of an oopsie with Mass Effect Andromeda. Not well received, very, very buggy, very, very broken. And there's conflicting reports as to why. Mostly now, with the benefit of hindsight, people generally agree it's because they were forced to move over to EA's brand new proprietary engine, because EA wanted to use this, like, all of our games are made on this amazing tech and everybody should be super, super excited about it. The games look great, and, you know, it's good for advertisers and it's good for investors to see that, oh, our proprietary tech is industry leading, whatever. But they forced them to use that, and it just was an engine that frankly was not built for RPGs or open world environments and things like that. And so the game really, really suffered when Andromeda launched. Super buggy, all sorts of highlight reels showing the immense number of bugs. Most famously was the Krabby Cat video that I'm sure you recognize. And what's funny is, in hindsight, this is 5 years and $40 million. Posted March 26th of 2017. Yeah, mix of masterpieces of animation and technical issues. Andromeda already got a 24% price cut less than a week after release. Yeah, it was not great. And these were the initial trailers they dropped, and then this is how the game actually was.
Mass Effect 4.
Just not great. Now, later reporting would come in and say that basically what happened is that the way the engine's set up is that they have a bunch of independent little systems. So they have the animation system for faces, they have the audio system, they have gameplay systems, and each is kind of like their own gear in a clock, if you think of it that way. And what they did is they actively were trying to fix stuff during development. So they had bugs over here. So this gear over here in the clock was broken and missing some teeth, so it'd skip and not work quite right. So they took that gear out, but to get to it, they had to take other gears off. And when they took other gears off, they put it back together and tried to fix it. But when they did that, it caused other issues. Another gear would break. And so every time they fixed something, it would create a cascading effect of other things that broke. And they just didn't have the time to fix it. The engine was not built for this. It didn't help. And so everything kind of started to fall apart. And on top of that, there were other things that just weren't very good. So for example, like the writing, just take this in.
All right, what happened? To who? To whom? And your goddamn father. Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything.
What? My face is tired. And they tried to come in and be like, oh, that's like it was supposed to be my faith. My faith is tired. It's been tested. That still doesn't make much sense. Sorry, my faith is tired from everything. What? It still doesn't make sense. Like, faith almost makes more sense than faith. Like, what are you talking about? So anyway, Andromeda was supposed to be this big reboot of the franchise. It's supposed to be like this kickstart of all sorts of new things. And it just didn't go anywhere. It just ended up being a poopy. So they decided, you know what? We need to fix this. We need to redeem ourselves. We need to redeem ourselves. How are we going to do that? Well, let's do it with a big, awesome, crazy new project in the form of something that was called Project Dylan. Project Dylan was announced. They showed a demo at E3 2017 that looked amazing. Look at this. Then they do a public demo in 2019, and like it doesn't look bad for a 2019 game. If anything, it looks in line with a 2019 game, but it really shows you how much they overpromised it in 2017. I mean, come on. Like, that's ridiculous. And this is why, like, all of this like marketing stuff, all has to do with how it's compared. Framing is another term for it. If they just showed this, I think that this graphically looks just fine for a PS4 and Xbox One game from 2019. This looks probably too good to be true even in 2024. If I saw this in a trailer at E3, I'd be like, okay, I'll believe it when I actually see it and play it. But for 2017, it definitely looked too good to be true. And it ended up being too good to be true. But this feels way worse after you were promised this. And it's a lesson that like Ubisoft has had to learn. It's a lesson that Bioware obviously has had to learn, that even if you announce a demo that looks amazing and people get super hyped for your game, any downgrades will do 10 times more damage than whatever like boost you got from initially overpromising. It's just not worth it. Like, if anything, go in with lower expectations and lower the expectations and then surprise them and blow everybody away, which I think is a fair way to approach it. And it reminds me of a conversation we had on the podcast yesterday. You should go check it out. Free Roam Podcast with Joe Raptor, up on Spotify, everywhere else. But when we did the podcast yesterday, I was talking about how Bioware should handle the marketing of Dragon Age, the Veilguard, because Joe Raptor pointed out something that I think is very, very fair, which is that they cannot afford any oopsies. They cannot afford a graphical downgrade. They cannot afford a scandal with over monetization. They can't afford any of that crap. They have to hit every single point along the way because people are so hyper skeptical, borderline cynical, because of their last two back-to-back releases. Project Dylan, which would eventually be known as Anthem, it was just an unmitigated disaster. It was supposed to be a live service game, and while graphically it was really impressive, and I think some of the core movement and stuff within the actual, what do they call them, javelins, they played pretty well, but frankly, the game just wasn't very fun or good in long time periods. Like, there just wasn't any content for it. And if anything, it was the same stuff that's going on now with all the PlayStation Live service stuff, where they're putting all of this work in, all this money in, and then realizing, hey, if we want to do live service, we have to totally abandon all of our single player ambitions. We cannot do any of that because all of our focus has to be on live service. And BioWare learned that 5 years ago, whereas it seems like PlayStation's learning that now, which is just funny. You know, history repeats itself. But they can't afford any oopsies because of these two back-to-back flops. And honestly, the fact that they still exist is honestly amazing, because any other time there's been a company or a studio that has had two back-to-back flops, they're gone. Even one colossal flop is usually enough to send you to the grave. I mean, it's just, that's just how it works. I mean, you guys remember this game? You remember this game? Let me show you this one. You might recognize this.
Yep. Here it comes.
This was an attempted reboot. This was, I mean, this represented hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was a flop, and they're gone, and you're done. You're done. So normally when a studio has a colossal flop, it's going to be very, very hard, if nigh impossible, to escape it. You're just screwed. So the fact that BioWare is even still around is wildly impressive, but it means that this is probably like the highest stakes game they've ever put out. You know, of course, Mass Effect Andromeda was a big deal, but this is literally life and death as far as I can tell. I don't know how on earth they could expect to release, say, Dragon Age the Veilguard. And if it's bad, I don't know how they could possibly hope to still exist. How EA would still let them continue working after that, I just have no idea. So they've been tactical with how they've shown stuff. They've been very precise with what they've shown, when and why. The gameplay that they've dropped graphically looks very, very impressive. I saw an extended look at this gameplay demo at Summer Game Fest. So this gameplay they dropped is about 20 minutes long. What we saw behind closed doors was the full hour that this is cut from. So there were other story beats. There was the character creator they went into more depth in. There were things like that, more character choice and consequence and stuff they showcased to us privately, but they eventually cut this trailer from that. And it's the tutorial section. It's the opening hour of the game. So it's not that indicative of overall scale or choice or anything, but it does hopefully give you an idea of the vibe they're going for. Some people have concluded this looks like absolute trash. I don't think it actually looks bad. It doesn't look like a traditional Dragon Age game, but then again, if they released just Dragon Age Inquisition 2, I think people would have also been very upset. So I think they're caught between a rock and a hard place. And I don't want to be the prick who's like, nope, no matter what, it's going to flop. You guys need to pay for Anthem, all these years later. I'm rooting for them to make an amazing comeback and for this to be awesome. I really hope it ends up being phenomenal, but time will tell. And this is where that distinction between cynicism and skepticism is so crucial. It just means not accepting something until there's sufficient evidence to accept that claim. And with this, there's all sorts of things that are weighing the scales. If you think of, we got to pull up MS Paint. We haven't done that today. We got it. It's a tradition here. So if we have a scale, that's teetering on a big old triangle, we got the scale going across, and then we have like a little bitty bucket on either side. Okay, we got our little buckets, our balance buckets. BioWare's previous performance. So if we say like, this is bad, the game will be bad. This is the game will be good. Okay. If we look over here, I would say Andromeda is a pretty big weight. Anthem is a pretty big weight, and it's more recent. You could also say, news of maybe the look of it being more of a traditional action game. Maybe that's something that is also a little bitty weight. Probably not that big, but like that's also a weight. Maybe the fact that a lot of the talent from the original Dragon Age games is no longer there. That's another weight. So these are all things pulling this down in the direction of the game being bad, right? Beyond that, on the good side, you can say, well, they seem to be taking a lot of steps very aggressively. They're saying this is a single player game first and foremost. They're showcasing, a lot of graphical improvements they've made. They've said that they have a hyper focus on polish right now. When I was at Summer Game Fest, they said that the game is like content good to go. They're just focusing on polish. So I don't know if that technically means that it's fully gold yet. Maybe it does. But they said they were just polishing. That's all they were doing, which is very promising. I mean, that's what you would hope to hear if they're really focusing on polish after the last two games primarily sucking because they were not polished. That's good. So there's all these things that you can put in each of these little buckets to figure out which way this is going to go. And in some cases, it'll swing so quickly and heavily over here that you just know it's going to be bad. For something like Gollum from last year, 2023, you could say like, oh, well, the developers seem passionate, but that's like the only good thing. And this is going to swing down to the bad very, very quickly. We saw that game in a trailer a while, like maybe a month or two before the reviews went out. And I was like, this is going to be a dumpster fire. I'm going to ask them for a review code. We got it, made a video on it, and it ended up being one of the worst games, if not the worst game of the year. But it's because like all of this was so readily apparent and there was basically nothing going for it. But with Dragon Age, the Veilguard, I don't think it's quite that simple. I think there are some things that are going for it, but I think it's too early to clearly conclude which way the scale is going to lean. But they are trying to get ahead of a lot of the skepticism around it. And I hope they understand that people are going to go into this very guarded, as they should. You do not get to release two back-to-back colossal flops and then just have us all forget about that and pretend like nothing happened. You just don't get to do that, okay? You have to win back our interest and trust before you can start asking for people to like pre-order your game, This article from VGC says, Anthem taught BioWare it should focus on what it's good at. Dragon Age, the Veilguard director says. Subtitle, quote, a lot of the people on this team came here to build a story-focused single-player RPG, which is what you would hope to hear. I mean, if you were like, most of the developers here are from Anthem and, they really want to bring some of that multiplayer fun to this game, I think that would be a big turnoff. But hearing them say that, yeah, the people here that are making this game specifically wanted to make this kind of game. They're not here to make anything else. They weren't here that, trying to do anything else crazy. They're just here to make a really solid game. That's what you'd want to hear. They say stuff like here, in a new interview with Edge Magazine via 80 Level, John Epler explained that while he was happy with many aspects of Anthem, he feels that making an online multiplayer game wasn't playing to BioWare's strengths. Quote, we're a studio that has always been built around digging deep on storytelling and role-playing. I'm proud of a lot of things on Anthem. I was on that project for a year and a half, but at the end of the day, we were building a game focused on something we were not necessarily as proficient at. It was visible. Expler, I think Epler. Yeah, Epler. They just misspelled it, I guess. Said that many of the Bioware team joined because they specialized in solo adventures, and as a result, they weren't able to deliver their best with Anthem. Quote, for me and for the team, the biggest lesson was to know what you're good at and then double down on it. Don't spread yourselves too thin. Don't try to do a bunch of different things you don't have the expertise to do. A lot of the people on this team came here to build a story-focused single-player RPG, which is what you would hope to see. Let's see. In a hands-on preview back in June, we said the Veilguard could be Bioware back at its best. Hands-on preview. So did they play it, or are they just talking about the same thing I saw? There was some understandable sour faces following Dragon Age's showing at the Xbox Game Showcase, but we're very happy to say that they are unfounded. Our demo was exciting and engaging and made us desperate to see the next 50 to 100 hours of the game. No Guardians of the Galaxy dialogue, no weird versions of pop classics, just a hulking Bioware RPG, something that has been sadly missing from gaming for so long. I will say that initial trailer they did was not what I felt was reflective of the actual game that we saw. That initial trailer they dropped was pretty cringy and I think downright bad at spots. It was just like, oh God, here we go again with a game made for modern audiences, and oh God, it's so cringy. But they actually, I think, delivered something much different in the gameplay trailer, which to me, I hope again they notice the feedback and they don't try to do this kind of thing again, because this, like, I get what they were trying to do, but this just feels very Marvel, and I don't think it works for the audience, the type of audience that likes Dragon Age. So I would encourage them to lean away from like the really cartoony, silly vibe, which this whole trailer was, and embrace some darker fantasy stuff. And if they can do that, I think people will be more connected to it. But this has been something we've seen with a lot of other games too, where the marketing team is like very Gen Z, very Zoomer, and they think that this type of thing is like really slay. I think that's what they do. I've been told it's slay, Queen. Is that right? Is that how they talk? They think that this type of trailer is really cool and that people are going to like snap in agreement. And the problem is that like 95% of all gamers don't think that's cool. Like they really don't. They find it to be an active turnoff. And it's the problem when you have like people that are marketing the game or making the game that either actively detest and hate their gamers, or that have like a desire to overthrow the established order of things and how gamers look at games and do that. And it's like, yeah, you made a game while you're actively telling your customers that you hate them. You shouldn't be surprised when they don't buy your game at the end of the day. It's basically the problem with Saints Row. The whole reboot is that the whole thing was like trying to lecture gamers on how bad they were and trying to do all sorts of fun, witty commentary on being anti-capitalistic. Meanwhile, they're selling a game at full price for a multi-million-dollar company. It's just really, really cringy. But I'm happy to say what we saw for Veilguard was not what seemed to be the vibe captured in that trailer. I'm just hoping that was a bad trailer. And hopefully after that, they reworked their marketing campaign and maybe stopped giving those people money. But let's see. They say in this hands-on demo, Dragon Age the Veilguard could be Bioware back at its best. Let's see. Okay, during our demo, we got to see the game's opening hour. This includes character. Okay, so they saw the same thing. They just kind of suggested that they had their hands on the controller when it was actually the game director that had his hands on the controller playing through it. Okay. It's a little kind of lying through omission. I don't know if it's even lying, but like they're suggesting they had hands-on time with the game when they didn't. It was the game director, but whatever. Unless they got the chance to play it and, nobody else in the world did. But environments look really solid. It does seem to be graphically pretty impressive, but the difficulty with Dragon Age, and we've talked about this for like a year and a half at this point, as long as this has been rumored, they are going to be compared as a fantasy RPG to Baldur's Gate. They just will be. And as a result, they're fighting a real uphill battle because you're going into a genre that was just redefined last year by one of the best games ever made, certainly in that genre. And if you're not coming out swinging with your own type of thing, it's with something truly, truly remarkable, you're just going to be compared, and chances are it's not going to hold up quite there. So they have to differentiate themselves. Now, I hope they're not differentiating themselves by being really slay. I hope they differentiate themselves maybe through the combat system. Maybe the combat's really, really solid, and that's engaging in a way that Baldur's Gate combat wasn't for a lot of people, because a lot of people tried to play Baldur's Gate and they just couldn't do the turn-based thing. It's too bad, because I really like the turn-based combat. Of course, being based on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, I really like it in Baldur's Gate 3, but I also totally understand why some people who are used to real-time combat just didn't connect with it. So that could be a way that you differentiate it, where it's like, yeah, it doesn't have quite as much like variability or roleplay nuance as Baldur's Gate, but the combat is a little bit more my style. So that's, I can kind of forgive the shortcomings over there. Things like that, they'll need to pull off, and I hope they do. I really hope they do. Because again, I don't want another studio shuttered. I don't want more people losing their jobs. I don't want another colossal flop. I hope the game is really good, and I hope they impress a lot of people, but they have to convince us of that. Nobody should go into this, as far as I'm concerned, and pre-order it. Nobody should go into this and give them all sorts of benefit of the doubt as a means of wishful thinking. If we get to the point where we start to hear about people that have played the game, they do say like 2-3 hour gameplay previews where they give all sorts of people access to the game and you get a wide swath of reactions to the gameplay, then we'll have a much better idea of what they're actually delivering here. But based on trailers and marketing stuff, you just don't know, because they did similar trailers and marketing crap for Anthem. They did similar stuff for of course, Andromeda. But what seems to be the case is that with this game this time around, they have intentionally not shown anything until they are very close to launch. I think it was Jeff Grubb has rumored that this is looking at a late October release, which, I mean, they basically will have announced it, and then within a few months, they will be launching globally. So I think at the very least, they've potentially learned their lesson that they shouldn't overhype this or show something thinking they can achieve it and then having to walk it back later. But, you know, time will tell. Time will tell. I really, really hope they have something special here. EA has had, you know, some hits and some misses in recent years. They did have Game of the Year 2021 with It Takes Two. They published that from Hazelight. So they have recently, just a few years ago, put out some very, very high quality stuff. Even Jedi Survivor through Respawn was really, really good. It was just kind of broken. I think that was more of a Respawn issue than an EA issue, because Respawn specifically with their single player stuff have just launched those Star Wars games with a lot of problems. I don't know why. But yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Exisa is 2021 was also Battlefront 2042, which was bafflingly bad. Like missing scoreboards at launch in a multiplayer shooter. Like, what? It's ridiculous. Unbelievable. So all of this to say, they are posting some stuff like this that, you know, previews that are very well received. They're saying other stuff that would make you think, okay, maybe they're actually doing things right this time. Maybe this could be good, you know, fingers crossed. And I hope it is. But you don't get to have 2 back-to-back flops and have us just forget about that. So we're going to go into this critically and skeptically, but we're going to try very hard not to be cynical and just pricks about it. You know, if they show something really good, it's important to give them credit for something that looks good. If they show something that looks like trash, we'll point out that it looks like trash. But pretending like everything ever is bad doesn't help anybody. And in the same way, being a fanboy and pretending like things that don't look very good look good is also stupid. You know, like I'll tell you that Star Wars Outlaws gameplay from IGN that was 10 minutes long looked really bad. And why that was so shocking is because what we played in person looked way better than that. Way better. Even when we played remotely for 4 hours. I know some people got to go and do like boat cruises and trips to Disneyland. I did not. We played remote. I played in my basement like a true G. But even our remote gameplay looked better than that IGN gameplay, which is why it was so stunning. And like, what is going on here? So we'll call it out. We'll point out that that looks bad. But when it looks good, we'll also point that out. Otherwise, you're just being a cynical asshole. And that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help anybody. And the problem that at the core of it, when you're like covering and talking about games a ton, is that when you say everything looks bad, nothing does. When you say everything looks bad, everybody's just like, okay, you're crying wolf constantly. And when something actually looks bad, nobody has any reason to believe you. And that's the problem with like a lot of this stuff is we were on stream on, what was it, Wednesday, when the Helldivers 2 patch was just coming out, and people were calling for like the game to be boycotted and all this. I was like, oh God, what did they do? And it turns out they nerfed a couple guns. It's like, okay. Like, I'm going to throw my drink accidentally because I'm feigning bedevilment. Like, if we're going to throw fits on that scale over something as little as they nerfed a gun or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever it was, at that point, I think we're being a little silly. I'm not going to believe you guys, not you guys, but like the people complaining about that next time you say boycott Helldivers, because that's like, again, we were talking earlier in the stream, that's a small thing. There's small things I don't like that can be small and not a big deal. I don't like it, but it's not a big deal. And then things that I don't like that are big deals. But the problem is nowadays, it seems like if there's anything you don't like, it's always a big deal when it just shouldn't be. Yeah, Arik, you're probably right. It's Twitter people, but yeah, that's probably most of it. He took my thing.